Good morning. We're moving into cells, and we need a fundamental understanding of the cell. And one of the first things that we find when we think about the cell is it is the only place in the universe we know of where life occurs. Life is those series of chemical reactions that promote all of those characteristics of life, such as the using of the energy, the reproduction, the genetic code, the development and growth. There's like 8 of them. I've just named a few. When those behaviors are present, when those activities are present, we can actually certify that as life. In our cell theory, we end up buying into the theory that the cell is the basic unit of life. For these transformations and these activities to occur, we have to have chemical reactions. A chemical reaction starts off with the reactants present at the molecular level, a change of disassembly of the atoms, and then a reassembly of the atoms into the molecules. So you got to take molecules have got to be present. The reaction goes on and new molecules are produced that accomplish those characteristics of life. The only place it occurs is inside the cell. So I've got a pretty simple drawing here about that. This is my cell. Got inside the cell, that's where life occurs. Outside the cell, life doesn't occur out there, but outside the cell are where the necessary molecules are located. They need to be brought into the cell, so they are the reactants to produce the products to accomplish those tasks. It might be helpful to remember this, that atoms, when they bond together, will become molecules. Now you can go backwards and take molecules and break them down to atoms and reform different molecules, have some waste products. So reactants to products, some products must be present for the life to occur. Then to an organelle will be a cell part, and then to a cell. Now once you've organized all these atoms and the molecules into organelles and you've got them into the cell, that's when life shows up. So our issue are the resources for life are outside the cell. And the resources, and when I say resources, the molecules and the atoms that are needed must get inside the cell. But this inside the cell is very selective. You really want only present those molecules that allow you to make up the substances of life. I'll say substances, I'll say chemicals. So like when we eat food, for our molecules, we break it down to the base molecules and we distribute them in our blood because most of these molecules are dissolvable in water. And when you look at blood, you find the plasma, which makes up, is it 70%? The plasma itself is 90% water. So these molecules dissolve in water and they bathe the cells. So the molecules needed inside the cells are bathed on the outside, but you run into the membrane. And this membrane is what they call a selectively permeable membrane. Some molecules allowed through, some not, some forced out. Some are allowed through all the time, some are allowed through when conditions inside the cell change. So we're going to take a look at the membrane. And the membrane is an organelle. It's not the whole cell, it's an organelle. It's a specialized part. Welcome back. The membrane is made up of phospholipid molecules. Got a very nice drawing. This is a better drawing than I could do, so why not use it, right? And as you can see, little tiny little atoms, oxygen phosphates, that's a phosphate group up top. And then they have a tail, and these are lipids. These are lipids. And if you remember, lipids don't like water. Keep that in mind. Here's my beautiful little picture here. Can you see the tissue-looking thing? That's baby oil in water. And you'll notice that it didn't dissolve in the water. It actually created a barrier. Keep that in mind. Just keep that in mind. So that's the essential molecule that makes the membrane. Again, another image. As you can see, the unit, the phospholipid here, and it's being taken and blown up from this arrangement here. Notice that there is a layer of them side by side by side by side. But also notice there's another arrangement of them here. And they appear to have the phosphate parts pointing, one pointing outside the cell and one pointing to inside the cell. The phosphates like water. They're attracted to water. Now, they're not so greatly attracted to water that they disassociate from the other. Their bonds are stronger here. But like a compass turns, these polar heads, they turn towards the water. But it creates this barrier of lipids. Now, the issue is, water that's on the outside needs to get to the inside. Water is a handy item to have inside the cell that provides hydrogens and oxygen atoms. And those hydrogen and oxygen atoms get used up in making products. Also, water is great outside the cell because you can dissolve all kinds of molecules in it, and it can get carried to the cell. So you get not only water, but you get the molecules. Otherwise, it'd be kind of tough to transport those molecules. But as water gets used up inside the cell, the issue is we need water to come across that membrane. Big issue. And if water couldn't come across that membrane, then water presence inside here, some of the reactants for those special products that need to be made, it'd be used up, and the reactions that we have for life could not be accomplished. This is the base of the membrane, but there's going to be a way to allow for molecules through. We're going to have to put some blemishes, almost like pimples in here, and I'll show you those in a second. This is an up-close look at the phospholipid bilayer. We use the word bilayer because of the two layers of the phospholipids. There they are, made up of atoms in a bonded arrangement. The blemishes of the phospholipid bilayer, the cell membrane, include these proteins. You can see there's various proteins that are part of the bilayer and actually create tunnels or passages or portholes for certain molecules to come through, as well as certain molecules to exit. These proteins have been built according to the DNA of that particular cell that's being read. So proteins you find in perhaps a muscle cell will be different than the proteins you'll find in a nerve cell. Because when you look at their specialized functions, the muscle cell will need certain molecules in, much more so than those same certain molecules need to come into the nerve cells. So that these blemishes, these proteins, are the passageways for those molecules to get the resources from the outside of the cell to the inside of the cell, so those chemical reactions can go on to produce the products that then give us what we call life.